In the heart of a jungle untouched by time, where the canopy swallows the sun and silence carries secrets, something moved. It wasn't the wind, it wasn't an animal, not really. From deep within the shadows, two eyes tracked every movement of the woman below. Steady, silent, watching. She didn't see him. She didn't feel the weight of his gaze. To her, the jungle was peaceful, alive with sound but free of threat. But to him, every leaf that rustled near her was a signal, every broken branch a potential danger. He was the ghost in the foliage, the guardian she never knew she had. Her name was Dr. Lena Carter, a brilliant primatologist on a mission to study the world's rarest gorilla troop. To her, it was a scientific expedition, a chance to prove a theory, to uncover the truth about an unusually intelligent group of silverbacks hidden deep in this remote wilderness. But someone else had been watching these creatures long before she arrived. Not just watching, protecting. The figure in the shadows wasn't a man anymore, though he had once been. He wasn't quite beast either. He was something in between, something born from a mission long buried by those who ordered it. Something that should never have survived. But survive he did. And now, he watched her, not as a predator, not as prey, but as something much more complicated, something that began long before she ever stepped foot into this jungle. And now his mission had changed. He would protect her, even if she never knew he was there. Even if it meant revealing the one thing he swore he'd never let anyone see. Himself. The dense jungle greeted Dr. Lena Carter with a quiet hum as she stepped onto the path, her boots sinking softly into the earth. It felt alive, the air thick with moisture and the sound of distant creatures that had long since mastered the art of disappearing when humans arrived. Lena adjusted the straps of her backpack, checking the map one last time before she moved deeper into the wilderness. She had come for one reason: the gorillas, the rare troop she'd read about in obscure papers. Gorillas that, according to rumors, exhibited strange behaviors, ones unlike any other group studied in the wild. For months, she'd been researching them, piecing together fragments of data, chasing a theory that most dismissed as fanciful. She wasn't about to let those whispers deter her. Lena had spent years building her career, and this discovery could change everything. As she trekked further, the jungle grew denser. The light was barely enough to see by, filtered through the thick canopy above. Her eyes darted to every rustle of leaves, every flicker of movement, half expecting to see the creatures she was studying, but they weren't here. Not yet. In the distance, a distant call echoed. Not from the usual birds or monkeys, but from something deeper in the jungle. It sounded human. Her breath caught for a moment, but she quickly dismissed it. The locals had spoken of odd things in the jungle, of strange legends, but Lena knew better than to entertain superstition. She set up camp near a clearing, confident that tomorrow would be the day she made the breakthrough. The fire crackled as she unpacked her equipment, her thoughts already on the task ahead. Little did she know, her presence in the jungle had not gone unnoticed. High above, through the thick branches of the towering trees, a figure watched her. Her every move was studied. Her scent lingered in the air, and her sounds, every snap of the branches underfoot, were catalogued. No, he was not an animal, not anymore. He was something else now. His eyes never left her. She was close, too close to the truth. The woman had no idea. She wasn't meant to. In the shadows, he waited. Night fell over the jungle, and the sounds of the day were replaced by a deeper, more primal symphony. The air grew cooler, thick with the scent of earth and rain. Lena sat by the fire, her eyes scanning her journal, making notes on the day's observations. Her mind was focused on the troop she had yet to find, the one that might hold the answers to her research. But the jungle around her was not as quiet as it seemed. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up, an instinctual warning she couldn't explain. She glanced around, half expecting to see a shadow pass by the edges of her camp. But there was nothing. just the usual rustling of nocturnal creatures going about their business. Still, the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as if something, or someone, was watching her. She brushed it off as paranoia. After all, she was alone in the wild. That kind of isolation could do strange things to a person's mind. But the nagging sensation remained. Lena quickly returned to her notes, though her eyes kept darting to the dark outlines of the trees that surrounded her camp. Then, a soft noise, a twig snapping somewhere in the distance. Her heart skipped. She paused, listening intently. Was it an animal? A larger predator, perhaps? She grabbed a flashlight, flicking it on and sweeping it across the area. But the beam only cut through the thick darkness, offering little more than glimpses of the underbrush. Nothing. She exhaled slowly, trying to calm herself. But then, another noise. This time, closer. Her breath caught in her throat. She knew the jungle well enough to recognize that these sounds weren't natural. They weren't from the creatures she expected. They were deliberate. Someone, or something, was moving in the shadows. Her pulse quickened. Could it be poachers? Had they found her? She stood up abruptly, scanning her surroundings, the light of the flashlight trembling in her grip. A moment of stillness. Then, out of the corner of her eye, she saw it. A shadow that didn't belong. It was large, far larger than a human, yet it moved with a grace that seemed almost too fluid, too purposeful. For a split second, she thought she saw the outline of a massive figure, a dark shape blending seamlessly with the trees. She blinked, but when she looked again, it was gone. Lena's heart raced. Her instincts screamed at her to move, to gather her things and leave. But she couldn't bring herself to do it. Her curiosity, the very thing that had brought her this far, kept her rooted to the spot. What was that? And why did it feel like it was watching her, waiting? As the minutes ticked by, the feeling of being observed never faded. If anything, it intensified. Her mind spun with possibilities. Had she discovered more than just a rare troop of gorillas? Had she stumbled upon something else? The jungle had its secrets, and tonight, she felt it was about to reveal one of its most dangerous. Lena couldn't shake the unsettling feeling that clung to her as she spent the following days tracking the gorilla troop. The shadows in the trees, the distant calls that echoed in the night. It was all beginning to feel too deliberate, too intentional. There was something out there, watching her, and it wasn't just her imagination. It was the night of the 5th day when it happened. Lena had spent the entire day mapping out the troops' territory, documenting their behavior, their movement patterns. The gorillas had been elusive, hiding in the thickest parts of the jungle, just beyond her reach. But tonight, something felt different. There was a quiet tension in the air, as if the jungle itself was holding its breath. She was walking along a narrow trail when she caught sight of something through the trees. A flash of movement. Her heart skipped a beat. It wasn't a monkey or a bird. This was something larger. She carefully crept forward, her steps light, her breathing shallow. The moment she reached the clearing, she froze. There it was, the massive figure of a silverback, standing tall among the trees. His fur gleamed in the moonlight, the muscles in his shoulders rippling as he moved. But there was something different about him. His eyes. They were too knowing, too intelligent. They locked onto hers with an intensity that sent a chill down her spine. For a long moment, Lena simply stood there, her breath caught in her throat. The gorilla didn't move, didn't make a sound. He just stared. And then, as if sensing her hesitation, he turned and vanished into the shadows, his massive form slipping silently into the undergrowth. Lena's mind raced. Was it one of the gorillas she had been studying? She had read reports of gorillas displaying unusual intelligence, but nothing like this. This one had looked at her with an awareness that went beyond instinct, beyond animal intelligence. there was something more. For the first time since she arrived, Lena felt a sense of unease that she couldn't ignore. This wasn't just a rare gorilla troop. There was something deeper at play here, something far more complex than she had ever anticipated. Her thoughts were interrupted by a rustling sound behind her. She spun around, but saw nothing. Only the dark, quiet jungle stretching out before her. Her pulse quickened. That feeling again, the sensation of being watched. Her eyes darted around the clearing, but there was nothing. The silence was deafening. Then, once more, a figure moved at the edge of her vision. It was brief, but unmistakable. The silverback. He was there, hidden among the trees, watching her, his eyes glimmering from the shadows. Lena's heart pounded in her chest as she took a cautious step back. She wasn't alone. But what did he want, and why was he so intent on following her? She had come to study the gorillas. But this was something far beyond what she had ever expected. The jungle, it seemed, was hiding more than just animals. It was hiding something far older, far more dangerous, and it wasn't ready to reveal its secrets just yet. The days passed in a blur of cautious observation, and yet Lena couldn't shake the nagging thought that the silverback was more than just an animal. His intelligence was beyond anything she had ever seen in the species, and every time she caught sight of him, there was a strange recognition in his eyes. It was as if he knew her. Then one evening, as the sun dipped low and the jungle was bathed in a soft, golden hue, Lena finally got the answer. She had been following the troop's trail when she stumbled upon an unexpected clearing. It wasn't just any clearing. It was almost too perfect, too secluded, as if nature had intentionally carved out a place for something to happen. And there, standing at the center of the clearing, was the silverback. But this time, he wasn't alone. Lena froze as the massive figure turned slowly, almost deliberately, to face her. He took a step forward, then another. For the first time, Lena noticed something about his gait. It wasn't just the walk of an animal. There was a purpose to it, a controlled, deliberate motion that seemed human in its fluidity. He stopped, barely 10 feet away from her, and she felt her heart race. The silverback's eyes didn't leave hers, and there, in the depths of his gaze, Lena saw something else, something familiar, and then it clicked. The memories, the fleeting fragments of conversations and faces from her past. A name that she had almost forgotten. Theo Grange. It had been years, but she recognized him. She recognized the way his eyes held a story, a life. She recognized the way he had looked at her before, so long ago, before the mission that had taken him from her life forever. Theo. The man who had volunteered for the program, the experiment that would alter him forever. He had been one of the first to sign up for the covert mission to infiltrate poachers' ranks, to become one with the gorillas. They had told her he was dead, that the mission had gone wrong, that he had disappeared without a trace. But here he was, standing before her in a form she could barely comprehend. The transformation had been much worse than anyone had ever expected. What was once a man was now something between beast and human. His body had been reshaped, altered, made for survival in the jungle. But his mind, his memories, had not been erased. Lena took a tentative step forward, her voice a soft whisper in the heavy air. "Theo, is that really you?" There was no answer, but the silverback's gaze softened, just slightly. His eyes held a depth of sorrow and recognition, as if he understood her words but could not reply. Lena's heart ached as she stepped closer, but a voice in her head told her to be cautious. She didn't know what he had become. She didn't know if the man she had once known was still buried inside this beast. Theo's eyes flickered to the side, and for a brief moment, Lena thought she saw a flash of something else, a memory, a fragment of the past. Then he turned his head back toward her, his expression unreadable. Lena felt a shiver run down her spine. This wasn't just a gorilla. This was a man, or at least the ghost of one. And he had been living in this jungle, watching over it, watching over her, all this time. As the realization settled in, Lena could only stare at him, torn between fear, confusion, and an overwhelming sense of awe. She had uncovered the truth, but it was far more complicated, far darker than she had ever imagined. Lena stood frozen, her heart racing as the silverback, Theo, continued to watch her with an intensity that made her feel both small and deeply connected to something ancient. The jungle seemed to hum around them, the silence between them stretching out like a thread, fragile and unspoken. It was a moment that didn't seem real, as if she were caught between two worlds, the one she had known and the one that had unfolded in front of her. For a long time, Lena couldn't bring herself to speak. The words she had prepared, the questions she had rehearsed, seemed insignificant now. What could she ask him? How could she even begin to understand what had happened to him? Theo's eyes flickered, his massive form shifting ever so slightly. It was as if he could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken weight of her presence. He knew who she was, and she knew deep down that he had been watching her all along. It wasn't just her research, her fascination with gorillas, that had drawn him to her. There was something more, something that tied their fates together in ways she couldn't yet understand. Her mind raced, memories flooding back, memories of Theo from before the mission, before everything had gone so wrong. He had been a man she respected, someone who had dedicated his life to protecting the innocent, to fighting for the greater good. They had been close, though never truly more than colleagues, never anything more than that fleeting connection that had once existed in another time. But that time had passed, and now Theo was gone, or at least the man she had known was. Lena took a careful step forward, her voice trembling. "Theo, why didn't you come back? Why didn't you tell anyone what happened?" Theo's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker in his eyes, a brief shadow of something painful that passed between them. He wasn't capable of words, not anymore, not in the way she remembered. His transformation had erased so much, leaving only fragments of the person he had been. But his eyes, those eyes still held something human, something that reached out to her in a way words could never. Theo's gaze softened, and for a fleeting moment, Lena saw him, truly saw him. It wasn't just the gorilla staring back at her. It was the man who had once fought for a cause, who had once been part of a team, who had shared a bond with her in a different life. The man who had been lost, altered beyond recognition, all for the sake of a mission that had gone wrong. Her voice cracked, barely above a whisper. "You were supposed to stop them, the poachers. But something went wrong, didn't it? They changed you." Theo didn't respond, but there was a shift in his stance. It was subtle, but it spoke volumes. He wasn't just here by accident. He had been watching, waiting for something, or someone. She was more than just a scientist to him. She was part of the story he had tried to bury, part of the life he had left behind. And now, that life was rushing back, pulling them both into a web of unspoken history. He had been sent on a mission to stop the poachers, to infiltrate their ranks and sabotage their operations. But the transformation had gone too far. He had become too much of the jungle, too much of the gorilla, and too little of the man he had once been. Lena took another step, her hands trembling as she reached out, as if trying to bridge the gap between them. "Theo, I don't know if I can help you, but we need to stop them. We need to stop the poachers." Theo's eyes met hers again, and for the briefest of moments, she saw a spark of recognition, of understanding. He had been protecting the jungle, protecting the troop, all this time. He had made his choice, to guard this land, to guard her, even if it meant staying hidden in the shadows. The jungle was his home now, and he had long since accepted the role it had thrust upon him. But it was clear that his mission was far from over. The poachers were still out there, still a threat to everything he had sworn to protect. And now, Lena had unknowingly become part of that mission. She had unknowingly stepped into a world she wasn't ready for, a world of danger, deception, and the truth about Theo's transformation. But despite the fear that churned in her gut, despite the uncertainty, Lena knew one thing for certain. The man she had known was still inside him, buried deep within the creature standing before her. And if she wanted to stop the poachers, if she wanted to help, she had no choice but to trust him, even if she didn't fully understand the price of that trust. The following days were a blur of uncertainty and tension as Lena tried to process what she had discovered. The weight of it all pressed on her, the realization that Theo, the man she had once known, was now trapped inside the body of a gorilla, a silent guardian of the jungle. But what did it mean? How could she help him, or anyone, if she barely understood the extent of his transformation? The jungle had become an eerie, watchful place. She had come here to study the gorillas, but now she found herself drawn deeper into a mystery that seemed to grow darker with every step. Theo had been following her, but now she could feel the change. His presence wasn't just a shadow anymore. It was a constant weight in the air, a silent reminder that something far bigger than her research was at stake. She couldn't ignore it, not when the danger was so close. Lena sat by her campfire one evening, the flames flickering in front of her as she tried to gather her thoughts. The night was quiet, but it felt wrong. The hairs on her neck stood on end, and she couldn't shake the feeling that something was about to happen. She glanced over her shoulder, her eyes scanning the surrounding trees. Then, in the distance, she heard the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate. Her heart jumped. This time it wasn't just Theo. The poachers had arrived. She had known it was only a matter of time. The same people who had caused Theo's transformation, who had set him on this mission, were still out there. They were still hunting the rare gorillas, still intent on exploiting the jungle for their own gain. Lena had read the reports, but now she felt the reality of it, the weight of their presence. Her pulse quickened. She grabbed her gear and started to move, trying to stay as silent as possible. She had no idea how many there were, but she couldn't take the risk. She needed to find Theo, needed to warn him. They were his enemies, the ones who had done this to him, and he needed to know they were here. As Lena moved through the dense undergrowth, the sounds of the jungle seemed to shift around her. The nightbirds were silent, the insects no longer chirping. It was as if the jungle itself was holding its breath, waiting. Then, out of the shadows, Theo appeared, his massive form stepping into the moonlight. His eyes locked with hers, and for a moment, everything else seemed to fade. Lena rushed toward him, her voice urgent. "Theo, they're here! The poachers! They've found us!" Theo's gaze remained steady, but there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Understanding, recognition, a deep, primal awareness. He didn't need words to know what was happening. He had been waiting for this moment, preparing for it in the shadows, always a step ahead of the danger. Lena could see it in his eyes, the same determination, the same fire that had once burned in the man he used to be, the man who had fought for justice, for the jungle, for the gorillas. He hadn't given up. He couldn't. Without a word, Theo turned and began to move, his powerful muscles rippling as he navigated the dense jungle with ease. Lena followed, keeping a safe distance behind him as he led her deeper into the forest. They moved quickly, silently, Theo's form blending with the darkness of the jungle, as if he were part of it, as if the very earth was protecting him. Lena struggled to keep up, her breath coming in short gasps. But she knew she had no choice but to trust him. He knew the jungle better than anyone. He had been living here for years, hiding, protecting, waiting for the day when the poachers would return. They reached a clearing, and Theo stopped abruptly, his eyes scanning the area. Lena could see him tense, every muscle in his body alert, ready to spring into action. He was waiting, watching for the first sign of movement, the first hint that the poachers were close. Lena held her breath, trying to steady herself, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around her. She had come here to study the gorillas, but now she was part of something far bigger, far more dangerous. She was caught in a battle, not just for survival, but for the truth, for the life of the man she had known, and for the future of the jungle itself. Then, the sound of footsteps, and then a voice low and threatening, cutting through the stillness. Lena's heart stopped. The poachers were close, very close. The air was thick with tension as Lena crouched low in the underbrush, her heart racing. The poachers were getting closer, their footsteps muffled but unmistakable. She could hear their voices now, low and grating, cutting through the otherwise silent jungle. "Keep your eyes peeled," one of them muttered. "We know they're out here. We're not leaving until we have them." Lena's breath caught in her throat. They weren't just after the gorillas, they were after Theo. The realization hit her like a cold wave. They had been hunting him all along, ever since the transformation. He had become the prize, the rarest of trophies, the living proof of what they had done. And now they were closing in on him, just as they had with every other endangered creature in this jungle. But Theo wasn't just another animal to be captured. He was a man. He was someone she cared about, and she wasn't going to let them take him. Theo stood still, his body rigid, every muscle poised for action. His eyes, however, betrayed nothing. They were sharp, calculating, watching the poachers with the kind of focus that only someone who had lived through countless dangers could possess. He knew the stakes, he knew what they wanted, and he wasn't about to let them have him. Or the jungle. Lena could hear the voices drawing nearer, each step carrying the poachers closer to their position. Her hands trembled, and she glanced at Theo, who remained as still as the trees around them. He was waiting for the right moment, waiting for the poachers to come into range. Lena's mind raced. She had to think quickly. If they moved now, they could get ahead of the poachers, maybe even trap them. But it would require getting closer, much closer, and that was dangerous. She knew the poachers wouldn't hesitate to shoot, to kill if they felt threatened. Theo's eyes shifted, catching her gaze, and for a brief moment, they exchanged a silent understanding. He would protect her. He would fight for her, just as he had fought for the jungle all these years. But this wasn't just about survival anymore. This was about stopping them. Stopping the poachers from destroying everything they had worked to protect. Without a word, Theo started to move, his massive form gliding through the jungle with the stealth of a predator. Lena followed as quietly as she could, her heart pounding in her chest. She had never been this close to danger before, but now there was no turning back. She had chosen a side. She had chosen Theo, and she would stand by him, no matter the cost. The poachers were almost upon them now. Lena could see the silhouettes of their figures through the dense foliage. There were 4 of them, heavily armed, their eyes scanning the shadows for any sign of movement. They had no idea what was about to hit them. Theo was already in position, crouching low to the ground, his powerful body coiled like a spring ready to unleash its fury. Lena crouched beside him, her breathing shallow, trying to stay as still as possible. Her heart beat in her ears as she watched the poachers move closer, each step bringing them nearer to the trap. Then with a single, fluid motion, Theo leapt into action. His massive form surged forward, faster than the poachers could react. He let out a deep, primal roar, a sound that echoed through the jungle, shaking the very trees. The poachers froze, their eyes wide with shock and fear as the silverback charged at them. Lena wasted no time. She sprinted toward the nearest poacher, her mind focused on one thing: disabling them. She didn't have a weapon, but she had the element of surprise. She grabbed a thick branch from the ground and swung it with everything she had, knocking the poacher's rifle from his hands. He stumbled backward, his eyes wide with disbelief. The other poachers were still recovering from the shock of Theo's sudden attack. One of them raised his rifle, aiming it directly at Theo. But before he could fire, Theo lunged at him, knocking him to the ground with terrifying force. The other two poachers turned, trying to flee, but Theo was everywhere at once, a blur of power and speed. He didn't give them a chance to react. In the chaos, Lena heard the crack of a gunshot. She spun around just in time to see one of the poachers fall, clutching his leg. But it wasn't Theo who had injured him. It was the fourth poacher who had taken a shot from behind. Lena's heart sank. This wasn't over. Not yet. She saw Theo turn toward the poacher who had fired, his eyes narrowing with anger. Without hesitation, he charged again, knocking the rifle from the poacher's hands. The poacher scrambled to draw a knife, but Theo was already on him, pinning him to the ground with a force that sent a tremor through the earth. Lena rushed to the fallen poacher, checking for any signs of injury. He had a bullet wound in his leg, but it didn't look fatal. She quickly bound the wound with a piece of cloth, trying to stop the bleeding. But there was no time. The poachers were incapacitated, but more could be on their way. Theo stood over the fallen poacher, his chest heaving, his eyes still burning with the fire of someone who had been pushed too far. He wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. He was fighting for everything he had lost, and Lena could see it in his eyes. He wasn't going to let anyone take his home again. With the poachers subdued, Lena knew they couldn't stay here. Not for long. The jungle had been temporarily protected, but the battle was far from over. The poachers would return, and next time, they wouldn't be caught off guard. As Lena looked at Theo, she knew one thing for certain. They weren't done. The mission had changed. It was no longer about just surviving, it was about fighting back. The silence that followed the chaos was almost deafening. The poachers lay scattered on the ground, their weapons discarded, their attempts at resistance utterly futile. Theo stood above them, his breath ragged, his chest heaving with the weight of the confrontation. The jungle around them was still, too still, as if waiting for something more, something that had yet to unfold. Lena took a deep breath, steadying herself. The adrenaline was still coursing through her veins, making everything feel surreal. She had never imagined herself in a situation like this, never imagined being this close to danger, to something so primal. And yet, here she was, standing next to a silverback who had once been a man, fighting for survival. Her hands trembled as she wiped the sweat from her forehead. She hadn't been prepared for the sheer violence of it all. The poachers, the danger, the raw power of Theo. But there was no time to process any of it now. They had won the battle, but the war was far from over. Theo was already moving, his gaze scanning the jungle, looking for any signs of further threats. Lena followed him, trying to keep up as he navigated the dense underbrush with ease. The poachers were temporarily neutralized, but they wouldn't be gone for long. They would regroup. They would come back. "Are you okay?" Lena asked, her voice steady despite the rush of emotions threatening to overwhelm her. She had to focus. She had to think. There was still so much they needed to do. Theo didn't answer, but his eyes softened when they met hers. It wasn't much, but it was enough. She knew he understood the gravity of the situation. They had only won a small victory. The poachers had seen what Theo was capable of, and if they were smart, they would be even more determined to hunt him down. They reached a small clearing, the trees opening up to reveal a narrow path that led deeper into the jungle. Theo stopped, turning to face Lena, his expression unreadable. For a moment, Lena thought he might leave, might disappear back into the shadows as he had done countless times before. But he didn't. He stepped closer to her, his eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time since the encounter began, she saw the full weight of his burden. He had been living this way for years, hiding, waiting, protecting, all alone. Lena felt a pang of guilt. She had come here to study the gorillas, but she had unwittingly walked into a world that was much darker than she had imagined. She had been an observer, but now she was part of the fight. part of a mission she hadn't signed up for but couldn't back away from. She opened her mouth to speak, but Theo placed a massive hand on her shoulder, stopping her. He didn't need words. His gesture was enough. He wasn't going to abandon her. Not now. Not after everything that had happened. And despite the fear that gripped her chest, Lena knew she wasn't going to abandon him either. "We need to get out of here," she said finally, her voice firm. "The poachers are going to regroup. We need to move now." Theo nodded, his eyes never leaving her face. Then, with a last glance at the poachers, who were still incapacitated but beginning to stir, he turned and led the way down the path. Lena followed, her steps quickening as she realized the urgency of the situation. The jungle around them seemed to close in as they moved, the thick vegetation pressing in on all sides. It was as if the earth itself was trying to swallow them whole, to conceal them from the dangers that lurked just beyond the shadows. They moved in silence, each step deliberate, each movement calculated. Lena knew they had to make it to the safe house, a hidden location deep in the jungle where she could tend to the wounded poacher and where they could regroup, plan their next move. But she also knew that their time was running out. The poachers weren't the only threat in the jungle. The real danger was something much more sinister. The people behind the poachers, the ones who had funded this operation in the first place. They were out there, and they wouldn't stop until they had what they wanted. Lena's mind raced. There was so much she still didn't understand, so many unanswered questions. But one thing was certain: she couldn't let Theo face this battle alone. She had become part of his world now, whether she liked it or not, and she wasn't going to back down. As they walked deeper into the jungle, Lena's thoughts turned to the future. What would happen next? Could they stop the poachers for good? Could she even trust Theo? She didn't know the answers, but she knew one thing. She couldn't let fear control her anymore. The jungle had become her battleground, and she would fight for it, for Theo, and for the gorillas. She would fight until the very end.